CEO fired a single dad after 30 years of loyalty, then she opened the envelope he left behind. For 30 years, Daniel Carter had never missed a single day of work. He had entered the company as a 20-year-old warehouse assistant and spent 3 decades giving everything he had to the same building, the same people, and the same promise he had made to his daughter, that no matter how hard life became, he would always find a way to keep a roof over their heads. But on the morning of his 30th anniversary, the new CEO looked across her polished office desk and fired him without even knowing the sacrifices he had made for the company. Daniel quietly accepted the envelope containing his final paycheck, placed his worn employee badge on the desk, and walked away without asking for sympathy. What the CEO did not know was that Daniel had left one final envelope behind, and when she eventually opened it, the truth inside would make her question everything she thought she knew about loyalty, success, and the man she had just dismissed. Daniel had spent most of his life believing that loyalty meant staying when everyone else left. His wife had passed away when their daughter Emily was only 6, leaving him with a little girl who needed a father, a mother, and someone strong enough to make difficult decisions without letting her see how frightened he really was. Daniel worked overtime, repaired broken equipment, covered weekend shifts, and accepted promotions that came with more responsibility but rarely more money. He never complained because every extra hour meant groceries on the table, school supplies in Emily's backpack, and eventually a chance for his daughter to attend college. The company became more than a workplace to him. It became the place where he had survived the hardest years of his life. Over the decades, Daniel watched the company change from a small family business into a powerful corporation. Executives came and went, offices became larger, computers replaced paper files, and employees who had once eaten lunch beside him eventually moved into corner offices. Daniel remained the quiet man everyone could depend on. He knew which machine needed maintenance before it broke, which employee was struggling at home, and which customer order could not afford to be delayed. He never became wealthy, but he became respected by the people who truly knew him. Then, after the founder retired, the company appointed his 38-year-old daughter, Victoria Hale, as the new CEO. Victoria was intelligent, ambitious, and determined to prove that she deserved the position. She had spent years building a career outside the company and returned with plans to modernize everything. Her consultants told her that the company carried too many long-term employees, too many outdated positions, and too many people whose salaries did not match their current job descriptions. To Victoria, Daniel was simply one of those names on a spreadsheet. She saw 30 years of salary expenses instead of 30 years of sacrifice. She saw an aging employee instead of a man who had quietly protected the company through countless difficult moments. On Daniel's anniversary morning, he arrived early carrying a small box of pastries for his coworkers. He expected perhaps a cake or a simple congratulations. Instead, an assistant asked him to report to Victoria's office. Daniel walked into the room wearing the same navy work jacket he had worn for years. Victoria barely looked up from the documents in front of her. She explained that restructuring was necessary and that his position was being eliminated effective immediately. Daniel listened quietly. For a moment, his mind went completely blank. 30 years disappeared in less than 5 minutes. He thought about Emily, who was now 26 and living in another city while trying to build her own career. Daniel had never told her how close he had sometimes been to financial disaster. He had hidden unpaid bills, skipped meals, and repaired his old shoes instead of buying new ones so that she could have what she needed. He knew losing his job would not only hurt his pride. It could destroy the small stability he had spent decades building. Yet Daniel did not beg Victoria to reconsider. He simply thanked her for the opportunity he had been given all those years ago. Before leaving, he removed his employee badge and placed it carefully on her desk. Then he took a sealed envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and placed it beside the badge. Victoria noticed it but assumed it was another administrative document. Daniel walked out without explaining what it contained. In the parking lot, he sat inside his old car for nearly 20 minutes before starting the engine. His eyes filled with tears, but he refused to let himself cry. He had promised Emily when she was little that no matter what happened, he would never allow hardship to convince him that he was worthless. That promise was all he had left. He drove home and sat at the kitchen table where Emily had once done her homework. For the first time in 30 years, he had no reason to wake up early the next morning. The following weeks were difficult. Daniel applied for dozens of jobs, but every application seemed to remind him that he was older than most employers wanted. Some companies never responded. Others offered temporary positions that paid barely enough to cover transportation. Meanwhile, Victoria continued restructuring the company. She celebrated increased efficiency and proudly presented the board with reports showing how much money the new strategy had saved. Then something unexpected happened. A major client filed a complaint claiming that the company's delivery system had become unreliable. Several long-term customers threatened to leave. Victoria's team searched through records trying to understand what had gone wrong. The problem was not immediately obvious. Orders were being entered correctly, but important details were disappearing between departments. The people responsible for fixing the problem had no idea that Daniel had spent years maintaining a handwritten system that connected those departments. One evening, Victoria stayed late in her office and noticed the envelope Daniel had left behind. She had completely forgotten about it. Curious, she opened it. Inside was not a resignation letter, an angry complaint, or a request for compensation. It was a collection of handwritten notes, photographs, maintenance records, and letters from employees who had worked with Daniel over the years. But the final page stopped Victoria cold. It explained that Daniel had spent years secretly creating an emergency fund for struggling employees. Whenever someone faced a medical bill, funeral expense, or family crisis, Daniel had quietly contributed from his own paycheck. He had never told management because he did not want praise. The documents showed that he had also personally prevented several costly disasters, including a warehouse fire and a major equipment failure that could have destroyed millions of dollars in inventory. Then Victoria discovered something even more painful. One document contained a letter from her father, the company's founder, written years earlier. He had described Daniel as one of the most trustworthy people the company had ever employed. He had written that if the company ever became successful enough to forget the people who built it, Daniel would be one of the men worth remembering. Victoria read the letter twice. Then she looked at the employee badge still sitting on her desk. For the first time since becoming CEO, she realized she had made a decision based entirely on numbers without understanding the human being behind them. The next morning, Victoria drove to Daniel's modest home. She expected anger, but when Daniel opened the door, he simply looked surprised. Victoria admitted that she had been wrong. She told him about the envelope, the records, and her father's letter. Most importantly, she told him that the company had lost more than an employee when it fired him. It had lost the person who understood its heart. Daniel did not immediately return. He had spent too many years believing that loyalty meant enduring anything. He finally told Victoria that he could forgive her, but he wanted the company to change. He wanted older employees to be treated with dignity, struggling workers to have access to emergency assistance, and promotions to consider character as much as performance. Victoria agreed. Daniel eventually returned, not as a warehouse employee, but as an advisor responsible for mentoring employees and preserving the company's culture. The emergency fund he had once created secretly was transformed into an official employee support program in his name. Emily later learned the truth about her father's sacrifices and realized that the quiet man who had always told her everything would be fine had been carrying far more than she ever knew. Months later, Daniel stood in the company's main hall as employees gathered to celebrate his 31st year with the company. Victoria stood beside him and publicly acknowledged the mistake she had made. Daniel accepted the applause with tears in his eyes, but he reminded everyone that loyalty should never be measured only by years on a payroll. Sometimes the most valuable person in a company is the one who quietly shows up, does the right thing, and asks for nothing in return. If this story reminded you that kindness, loyalty, and second chances still matter, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to SoulTales if you believe every good heart deserves a second chance. Daniel never became a billionaire. He never owned a mansion or drove an expensive car. But he had something money could never buy, the knowledge that his life had made a difference. The envelope he left behind had not been designed to punish Victoria. It had been his final act of faith in the company and the people he had served for 30 years. And that was what changed everything. Sometimes, the greatest legacy a person can leave is not what they earned, but what they quietly gave away while nobody was watching. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to support the video with a like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to SoulTales so more stories like Daniel's can reach people who need a little hope. Before the story ends, comment, "Loyalty still matters," if you believe that kindness should never be forgotten, even when the world fails to recognize it. Because sometimes, the person we are quickest to overlook is the person whose heart has been holding everything together.